He came up from the south, where the air still held a memory of sage and fire. Winter hadn't quite touched the borderlands yet, not like it had this far north, where the earth lay tight beneath frost and the rail ties cracked under the weight of night. His name was Eli Carradine, and he was the kind of man people watched before they spoke to. Tall in the saddle, lean as a lariat, with the quiet bearing of a man who'd lost more than he'd found. 37 winters had shaped him into something solitary and slow-moving. He owned land, too much for one man, but rode as if he had none. His hat was sweat-stained, boots worn silver at the heels, and his coat bore the smell of horses and pine pitch. It was near midnight when he rode into the depot town of Whitbridge, the wind curling like a knife between the slats of the old station wall. No train was due until morning. The depot sat hollow-bellied and shivering under the moon. A crooked sign swung in the wind. One oil lamp burned dim in the telegraph office, but otherwise the place had folded in on itself for the night. Eli had come to fetch something, or someone, a new mare from Wyoming, bred for high altitude. But the train carrying her had stalled in the mountains and wouldn't arrive till dawn, so he waited. There wasn't much else to do. He unsaddled his horse, tied him under the awning where it was half-sheltered from wind, and stamped warmth back into his legs. Then he saw her. She was sitting on the depot bench, arms wrapped tight, coat thin as ash, not near enough to be sleeping and not quite awake. Her breath was visible in the lamplight. A bag sat beside her, some worn leather affair with one strap broken. Her shoes were nurse's shoes, though scuffed near to ruin, and she held herself with the unconscious posture of a woman trained to brace others first, herself last. Eli paused. The wind moved her hair where it had slipped from its pins. He walked closer. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady but low, as if not to frighten something fragile. "You all right?" She blinked, not fast, just once, then turned her head toward him. Her eyes were dark, hollowed from long travel or long grief, he couldn't say. Her cheeks were raw from cold, fingers pink and stiff. "No," she answered. There was no tremble to it, just truth, one syllable clean as ice. He crouched one knee to the frozen platform, trying to see if she was bleeding or ill or worse. "Name, Eli Carradine. You want to tell me yours?" She hesitated, then nodded once. "Claire. That's your only name. For now." The wind lifted again. A gust blew snow sideways across the tracks. Eli rose slowly, heart feeling oddly unsteady. There was something about the way she didn't flinch. As if she had already braved the worst of something, and anything that came after was just weather. He took off his coat, held it toward her. She didn't reach for it. "You'll freeze like that," he said. "Ain't a fair trade for silence." Her eyes flicked to the coat, then to his face. He held her gaze. She finally took it, slow, as if he might change his mind. She wrapped it around herself and closed her eyes. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked after a long silence. "No." "You expecting someone?" "No." "You run from something?" She opened her eyes. "Yes." Eli nodded just once. He had known the shape of fugitives before, and not all of them were guilty. "All right," he said. "There's a room above the stables. It's warmer than this. You can sleep there till morning. Ain't much, but it's dry." Claire didn't move. He didn't press. After a moment, she stood on legs that shook and followed him without a word. That was how it began, with frost in the air and no promise in it, with a woman alone on a bench and a man who'd come to fetch a horse but found something else entirely. She never asked why he helped her, and he didn't ask what she had done. Not yet. The loft above the stables was rough-hewn, the boards wide and knotted, the kind that moaned in the wind but held steady beneath snow. Eli lit a lantern, its glow small and soft against the dark, and handed her a tin cup of water warmed by the stove. She drank without hesitation, then sat on the edge of the cot he kept for drifters or cowhands between drives. Her boots were off now, tucked beside her, and her feet bore the swollen red marks of someone who had walked too far on promises too thin. Eli didn't speak. He moved about the room, checking the firebox, adding a log, untying the scarf from his throat. He didn't watch her, but he felt her gaze on him like weight. When the fire caught, he knelt and held his hands to it. "You a nurse still?" he asked after a while. Claire's voice came quiet but direct. "Not anymore." "Ward. Not that kind." He nodded, The years had been full of wars, many without a name. He'd seen enough of them, in men in towns, in marriages come apart like old seams. Whatever hers was, it didn't need dissecting in the quiet of midnight. "You from the East?" he asked. "St. Louis, born and worked there." "Till I was." She didn't elaborate, he didn't press. It was like talking to someone on the edge of a frozen lake, every step careful, every word a footfall that might break the surface. Claire finished the water and folded her hands in her lap. She sat straight, like she couldn't afford the luxury of rest even now. Eli stood and crossed to a trunk in the corner, brought out an old wool blanket and a tin of salve. "For your hands," he said. "Cold been cruel." She accepted it, hesitating a breath longer than before, unscrewed the lid and dipped her fingers into the balm. Her hands were clumsy, red-knuckled. She moved as though she hadn't been touched kindly in a long time. Eli watched the fire. The wind gusted outside, whistling faintly through the stable slats. Below them the horses shifted, one of them snorting, another stamping its hooves against the straw. It was a comfort, the steadiness of animals, the simplicity of their needs. After a while, Claire spoke again. "You live here." "I've got a ranch 10 miles out. Came for a mare that never made the train." "You always offer strangers your bed." "Only when they look like they'll die otherwise." A faint twitch at her mouth. Not quite a smile, but close enough to make him glance her way. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. "I'll sleep downstairs. There's a bell if you need anything. Firewood stacked behind the stove. Should last till morning." As he turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "If I stay longer than tonight, will that be a problem?" Eli turned to face her. Her eyes were steady now, more awake than they had been at the depot. There was a resolve in her, thin but unyielding. "No," he said, "it won't." She nodded once, and that was it. He descended the ladder and left her to the silence. In the dark below, among the horses, Eli laid out his bedroll near the stove, listening to the soft movements above. He didn't know what she'd run from, but he knew the sound of survival. It rang in her voice. It walked in her bones. Outside, the storm deepened, snow hushing the world inch by inch. And in the loft above the stable, a woman who had no home and no name beyond the one she'd given curled beneath borrowed wool, clutching warmth like a secret. In the morning, everything would be different. But for now they slept, one above, one below, separated by timber and memory, bound by nothing more than mercy and a single night of wind. Morning broke soft, filtered through the high stable windows like sifted wheat. Snow had fallen heavy, burying the road and blurring the fences, but the sky was clear now, cold and blue and vast. A silence held the land, as if something sacred had passed through in the night and left behind its hush. Eli rose before first light. He moved with the practiced quiet of a man long used to solitude, fed the horses, checked the latches, split wood with slow rhythm and laid a fresh fire beneath the kettle. He didn't climb the ladder to the loft or call up to her. Whatever had brought her to his threshold hadn't settled yet, and he knew enough not to reach into a storm before it had passed. She came down an hour later, wearing her shoes and the coat he'd loaned her. Her hair was neater, her face washed in cold water, and though she didn't speak, her spine had straightened some. She looked less like a stray and more like a woman who'd chosen her silence. Eli poured her coffee without asking. She took it with a nod. They drank in quiet, seated on opposite ends of a workbench, steam rising from their cups. It was not friendship yet, but something kinder than distance. After a while she asked, "Do you take in many people?" "No." "Why meet?" "Seemed you reached the end of something." She looked down at her hands. They were wrapped now, the salve having done its work. She flexed her fingers as though surprised they still obeyed her. "I was meant to meet someone in Willow Flats," she said, "a woman who helps girls out of trouble. But the train never made it that far. Broke down 3 stops back. I walked." "How far?" 17 miles. He nodded, not out of disbelief, but out of recognition. He had walked farther for less once. "You still need to get to Willow Flats." Claire shook her head. "She's gone, left town after a raid. Word came through the telegraph station just before I got there." "You want to try somewhere else?" Her eyes met his. There was something brittle in them, something worn too thin to patch. "No," she said, "not for now." The wind lifted a bit of snow through the cracks beneath the stable door. Eli rose and fetched his coat. "I've got stock to tend. You're welcome to stay the day, and the night if you need it." She didn't answer, but she stood with him, steady on her feet now. "I can help," she said. He didn't say yes or no. Just passed her an old pair of gloves and led her out into the snow. That day they moved in tandem, not speaking much but working side by side. She mucked stalls, rolled feed barrels, scrubbed troughs. He saddled a gelding, rode fence, returned with a branch caught in his collar. They ate bread and stew by the stove in the tack room, and though their lives had never touched before, the hours shaped a quiet rhythm around them. In the afternoon, she found the broken-hipped dog behind the grain shed. Half frozen and growling at nothing, blind in one eye. She didn't flinch, just crouched low and murmured until the animal let her near. Then she picked him up like he weighed nothing and carried him to warmth. Eli watched from a distance, heart ticking slow and strange. By dusk, she'd taken over the loft again without asking. She laid the dog beside her, wrapped in an old rug, and fed him broth by the spoon. Eli stoked the fire and said, "You were good with him." "I was good with many," she said, not looking up. He didn't ask what had ended that goodness. Only nodded once, then left her to the dark. Outside, stars pierced the sky like silver nails. The snow held their light, and the world, for the first time in a long time, felt almost clean. By the fourth day, she had made herself part of the place, not by declaration or permission, but through the slow occupation of labor. She rose before the sun, swept the frost from hinges, mended the broken strap on her bag with thread from Eli's old kit. She said little, but her hands spoke in bread dough and clean bandages, and the way she rubbed warmth into the old dog's stiff limbs each morning. Eli didn't ask her to stay, and she didn't ask if she could. It was a quiet agreement, forged in the exchange of small efforts: chopped wood, washed mugs, a saddle cinched just right. He took her to the ranch on the fifth day, not the main house yet, but the upper field, where the young steers were kept and the fence line sagged in the corner. She rode behind him on the mule, arms loose around his waist, and said nothing when the wind turned sharp across the ridge. "You ever work cattle?" he asked as they dismounted. She looked at him. "I've worked worse." He smiled, a faint curve of his mouth that surprised them both. She didn't return it, but something softened between them nonetheless. She mended wire while he reset posts. It was slow, hard work, and the cold made fools of their fingers. But by dusk the fence held again, and Eli found himself watching her. Not in the way a man watches a woman, but in the way one watches a storm recede, unsure if it's truly past. That night they shared supper in the kitchen of the bunkhouse. She lit the stove without asking, stirred lentils into stew, found the rhythm of the place like a stone finding riverbed. Eli watched from the doorframe, hat in hand. "You cook like you've done it under fire," he said. "I have." "Hospital. Worse." He didn't push. There were still shadows under her eyes, but she carried them better now. She wore her hair back in a tighter knot, and her shoulders no longer hunched as if expecting a blow. Later they sat near the fire, the dog curled between them. Outside, coyotes sang from the hills. Eli sipped from a tin cup of rye and passed it to her. She drank, winced, handed it back. "I buried my brother," she said suddenly, 6 months ago. Morphine took him slow. Eli said nothing. "I stayed too long after that, with a man who—" her voice caught, but she didn't falter. "I wasn't afraid of what he did. I was afraid it felt familiar." Eli stared into the flames. "You ever think about going back?" "To what?" He nodded, understanding that kind of emptiness. They sat in silence for a long while, not filling it with anything false. Then she asked, "Why are you alone?" "My wife died," he said. 10 years past. Fever took her fast." She looked at him, eyes neither soft nor sharp, just seeing. "And you never remarried?" "No need. The land keeps me honest." Claire reached down, stroked the dog's ragged ear. "The land or the ghosts?" Eli didn't answer. It was late when she rose, fetched the blankets, made her bed near the fire without asking. He offered her the cot. She shook her head. "I've slept in worse places," she said. He nodded, and as he banked the fire, he looked at her, really looked, and saw a woman no longer frozen but thawing slow, dangerous, and sure. The kind that survives, the kind that stays. Spring came late to that stretch of Wyoming, riding in slow and mud-slick, loosening the earth by inches. Snow melted off the roof of the barn like tears off tin, and the pasture began to green in patches. Calves were born, one was stillborn. Another was pulled into life by Eli's calloused hands while Claire braced the heifer's neck and whispered steady breath into its ear. She had been there 2 months by then. Still wore her borrowed name, but it had settled into her skin like a second wind. In town, they called her Miss Claire, and no one asked more than that. Folks had seen enough come and go with ghosts trailing behind. The ranch breathed easier with her in it. Laundry hung straight, fences held. Eli stopped waiting for her to leave. She never said she meant to stay, but some truths didn't require saying. One afternoon, she found the boy. He was curled in the dry creek bed below the orchard, shoes worn down to nothing, cheek pressed to a root as if he'd crawled there to die. 12, maybe 13, with a fevered tremor in his limbs and blood on his lip. A runaway, clearly. She crouched beside him, hand brushing his brow, heat like fire. She called for Eli. They carried the boy to the bunkhouse. Claire boiled cloth, stripped him of rags, sponged the blood and filth away. He flailed at first, terrified, half delirious, but her voice settled him, and Eli's steady presence at the door kept the panic at bay. 3 days of fever followed. She slept beside the cot in shifts, fed him broth when he could swallow, changed his clothes when he sweated through them. The boy muttered nonsense, names that weren't hers, places she didn't know. She stayed anyway. Eli watched the return of that part of her, the nurse, the guardian, the woman shaped by tending. It broke something in him to see her shoulders tense with old discipline, to see her fight sleep like it owed her something. But it healed something too. He helped where he could. Cut wood, fetched water, sat with her in silence when the boy's cough kept her from rest. The child woke on the 4th night, eyes wild at first, then calmer when he saw her. "You're all right," she whispered, brushing hair from his brow. He stared at her. "Are you?" She didn't answer. The boy's name was Jacob. He'd run from a camp in the south, one of those workplaces where orphans were sold into labor, branded by hunger and silence. His scars told enough. Claire didn't ask more than he could offer. She washed his clothes, stitched the worst of his wounds, and when he cried once, sudden and sharp, she held him like she'd known him forever. Eli saw it happen. Saw her heart open without her asking it to. Saw her begin to weep again, not for herself, but for the boy. After that, Jacob stayed. Took to chores easy, followed Eli like a shadow, looked to Claire as something between mother and savior. The three of them moved in orbit around each other. Not a family, not yet, but some beginning of one. One night after the fire had gone low and Jacob had gone to sleep, Claire stepped out onto the porch. Eli followed. The stars were loud above them, bright enough to see by. The land stretched black and silver beneath a moon the color of pearl. Claire spoke without turning. "I never wanted children, not because I couldn't love them. Because I couldn't keep them safe." "You kept him," Eli said. She nodded slowly. "For now." He stepped beside her, leaned on the rail. His shoulder brushed hers, light and unassuming. "Sometimes for now is all there is," he said. They stood like that a long time, listening to the wind move through the grass. She didn't pull away. And for the first time since she'd come to him at that frozen depot bench, Eli let the thought settle in his mind, clear, quiet, sure. She wasn't just passing through, and neither was he. Summer bled in without ceremony. The days lengthened, sweet with dust and clover, the kind of heat that softened even the hardest truths. The land, once brittle with frost, swelled green and open. Calves fattened, tomatoes came in. Bees hummed near the porch posts. Time passed not in days but in small certainties, quiet meals, worn boots by the door, a boy's laughter skipping through open windows. Claire had been on the ranch nearly half a year. She no longer wore the borrowed coat. She mended her own hem, planted herbs beneath the sill, patched Eli's shirts without fanfare. She took to riding alone in the early hours, out past the ridgeline, where the grass grew wild and thick, and the air smelled of cedar and stone. Eli watched her without intrusion, watched the way her hands no longer trembled when she stitched. The way she sat at dusk with a cup of chicory and the dog curled close, no longer needing to flinch at sound or silence. One evening, Jacob came in from the Northfield carrying a dead crow. Its wing was snapped, body limp. He cradled it with reverence, unsure if it had died just then or long before. Claire met him by the well, took the bird gently, examined it. "You don't bury it," Jacob said, uncertain. "No," she said. "We burn things we want to be sure stay gone." Eli built the fire. Claire wrapped the bird in burlap and set it atop. Jacob stood beside them, arms crossed, a boy pretending not to need comfort. As the crow burned, Claire touched his shoulder. "Everything that dies," she said softly, "gives something back." Jacob didn't speak, but he stood straighter. That night, when the house went still, Claire walked out to the corral. Eli was there already, leaning against the gate, smoking slow and thoughtful. "She's gone," Claire said, "the woman I was." Eli nodded. "I figured, but I liked her well enough." Claire almost smiled. "You afraid she'll come back?" he asked. "No," she said, "but I still dream in her bones." He put out the smoke, turned to her. "You don't have to stay." "I know. But you are." "I am." Eli looked at her then, eyes steady. Not with hunger, not with longing, but with that rare patience that had shaped his days. A man who'd learned that nothing good came quick. Who understood that healing wasn't something to demand, but something to witness. He reached for her hand. She let him. The silence between them wasn't silence anymore. It was the language of people who had nothing left to prove. Behind them, the house held light in its windows. Inside, Jacob slept beneath a quilt she'd mended, and the old dog snored at his feet. The wind rose, not harsh now, just steady, familiar. The next day, Eli saddled 2 horses and packed a lunch. Claire rode beside him, her hair loose beneath her hat. They moved at a walk, out toward the northern pass, where no one watched, where the hills broke open like a blessing. They didn't speak of forever. They didn't need to. She had come from ruin, and ruin had not taken her. He had lived with ghosts and found one willing to stay. And in that wide country where mercy moved slower than law, where names mattered less than the acts they carried, they rode forward, not to escape the past, but to meet it. Together.